Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the February 18 meeting of the Ann Arbor City Council. If you're able, please rise and join us for a moment of silence, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. Would our clerk please call the roll of council?
Councilmember Hayner.
Here.
Councilmember Bannister.
Here.
Councilmember Griswold.
Here.
Councilmember Lum.
Here.
Councilmember Grant.
Here.
Councilmember Ackerman.
Here.
Mayor Taylor.
Here.
Councilmember Eaton.
Here.
Councilmember Nelson.
Here.
Councilmember Smith. Councilmember Remlawi.
Here.
We have a quorum.
May I have a motion, please, to approve the agenda? Moved by Councilmember Lum, seconded by Councilmember Ackerman. Discussion of the agenda. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The agenda is approved. Do you have communications today from our city administrator?
We do, Mayor, and thank you for a couple of moments. I want to start by thanking Officer Verhelli for being here somewhere this evening. There are quite a few items attached as communications from the city administrator. Some are a bit overdue, but it's a lot of good information, particularly as you look at AC 7, which highlights the improvements to crosswalks and has some pedestrian safety statistics in there as well. This morning, we had the opportunity to celebrate ceremonially the beginning of the Allen Creek berm opening project. Those of you who are brave enough to maybe put up with a little bit of bad weather and certainly a little bit of speech making, got to commemorate the start of a project that in many ways is typical of how life is in Ann Arbor. There are a lot of people involved. There's a little bit of mashing of gears to get there. But with persistence and good intentions, we got to the point where we were going to launch a project that's transformative and will be transformative in our lives and those of our children. And with that, I'd like to take an opportunity to share a couple thoughts about item DC8, which Council will consider later this evening. Based upon the outcome of that matter, this may be the last evening we get to spend together, but in full recognition that Council has the ability and the desire to provide the best possible leadership for the city government. I do want to thank Council members, both past and present, and all the members of the community, our residents, our businesses, people who live, work, and play here, our nonprofits, certainly the University of Michigan and the Ann Arbor Public School System, and many others for the opportunity to serve you over the last 4 years. Those days have been full and certainly not without challenge, but when I look at what's transpired, I'm amazed at how quickly the time has gone by. I also wonder how that experience has profoundly impacted the values that shape me. And in that light, rather than talk about a long list of accomplishments which will quickly be forgotten, I'd like to share some thoughts on what public service means and what I would consider the 4 pillars of that, which are purpose, respect, health, and joy. I'll start by telling you have the most amazing city staff who have dedicated their lives to the purpose and meaning of public service. They operate in that lane between where we are now and where we aspire to be. That path is often rocky and sometimes disruptive and certainly not linear, and the journey at times winds up in places that we don't expect. We may also have spirited and robust discussions on the directions as we're driving, but please know that you should have confidence that your staff will keep us headed in the policy direction that Council has established. Secondly, when we talk about respect, remember that running for Council is hard and serving as an elected official is harder still, especially in an era where there's no line between our public and private lives, and the memory of the internet is eternal. Yet in spite of this, Council members choose to take time from their loved ones, their careers, and other things that provide purpose and meaning to them to serve you. The commitment that they make for the community should always be respected, and we should remember that you have selected your neighbors to do extraordinary things. The tasks that council members and staff take on can become all-consuming and can wear out even the hardiest Michigander. Taking time out to ensure that we're all physically, mentally, and spiritually healthy is not selfish, but rather essential in preserving balance in our lives and in our abilities to serve the community. Along those lines, we should always remember to take the time to tell each other how much we appreciate you, how much we care for each other, and how much we respect each other. The last pillar that I'd like to really talk about is that which is the joy of public service. We've accomplished and set in motion many significant efforts in addition to preserving and protecting the tremendous quality of life that we have in Ann Arbor. Much of what we do goes unnoticed, and that is the nature of the job that we've chosen. We may also never know to the extent to which we positively impact the lives of people in our community. In closing, I do want to share a little bit of a personal perspective. I've made no secret, and at times have been a little bit obnoxious about the fact that I've recently become a grandparent. I had no idea when that occurred how it would so severely and positively impact my views as well. When I look at my grandson, I know that he will always have a warm, safe, dry place to sleep with people who love him, that he will always have access to healthy food and quality medical care, and he will get an exceptional public education that will prepare him to be successful in life. Those are rights that every parent and every grandparent in our community and in our nation should expect and they deserve, and not just because they're privileged enough to pay for them. They lie at the very core of our Ann Arbor values, and I'm confident that the members of this body will always work together on behalf of our children. I want to thank you again for the opportunity to serve and the experiences of the past 4 years. And with that, I wish you purpose and meaning, love and respect, good health, and above all, the joy of service to others.
We have no introductions today. We now come to public comment. Public comment reserve time. Public comment reserve time is an opportunity for members of the public to speak to council and community about matters of municipal interest. To speak at public comment reserve time, one needs to have signed up in advance by contacting our city clerk. Speakers have 3 minutes in which to speak, so please pay close attention to the time clock. As a matter of courtesy, we may have only one person speaking at a time. And finally, if you require assistance in speaking before council today, we'd be delighted to provide it to you. Our first speaker today is Elizabeth Collins.
Hi, City Council, Mayor Taylor. I'm speaking today about DC3 and the pesticide management. I want to thank Councilmember Bannister for bringing this forward. This is a great start to help with the health of our water systems, pollinators, birds, all wildlife, but especially human health. This definitely ties in with our sustainability goals and 2030 A20. Without spraying pesticides on our lawns, we will get the natural grasses growing, which is less maintenance, less mowing, which in turn is less carbon. And this should just be the beginning. If we are to be truly sustainable and responsible in our environment, we want to expand this. We should be working on future ways to ban Roundup and other dangerous chemicals. I am so pleased to have the city work on getting this important information out to the public, especially how to dispose of pesticides properly that we may have in our garages, how to implement growing prairie grasses and different landscaping to be sustainable in the future. This is great, and thank you to Councilmember Bannister and the Environmental Commission for having this on your radar, and thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Rita Mitchell.
Hi, I'm Rita Mitchell. I live at 621 Fifth Street. E.O. Wilson, one of our prominent national advocates for biodiversity, said, "I will argue that every scrap of biological diversity is priceless, to be learned and cherished, and never to be surrendered without a struggle." He also said, "In order to protect the bulk of diversity and of biodiversity and ensure a healthy planet, we must conserve half the Earth's lands and seas to provide species the space they need to thrive." We have a chance. The time to act is now, and you have started. And I thank you all for moving on the 2030 climate emergency. I want to also thank the efforts of Missy Stultz and the staff at the Office of Sustainability and Innovations, and the many community members and groups who are working hard to take effective action against climate change. And in particular, I want to thank Councilmember Bannister for her dedication to the sustainability goals by her shepherding forward the resolution urging the city to compile and disseminate educational and outreach materials about integrated pest management best practices and turf grass reduction strategies to owners of turf grass within the city. That's all of us. The resolution's community educational effort will provide an important element to help us live in greater health and harmony with nature. It will provide information to residents, businesses, religious organizations, and campuses. All of us can reduce both the use of toxic chemicals on gardens and yards and the amount of mowed turf grass, and have the result of a beautiful and safe surroundings for people, pets, and pollinators. The outcome of the resolution will be to provide information compiled by professional city staff used in our parks on effective methods to manage our collective outdoor spaces without use of chemical pesticides and to reduce turf grass areas. We'll work to expand the spaces around the city that provide habitat for pollinators and urban wildlife and chemically safe spaces to allow children and pets to touch the earth and plants without being harmed by toxic poisons. The plants that grow without harmful chemicals will provide safe food for the pollinators, birds, and other wildlife that depend on plants for their food. Ann Arbor's landscape is already drastically altered from what it was like in pre-settlement days. The resolution before you tonight will not turn back the clock, but it gives us an opportunity to expand community knowledge to support living with our surroundings, to contribute safely to the biodiversity of ecosystems of which we are part. Let's work together and provide the space that all species need to thrive. Please vote yes on this resolution. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Eric Lipson. Mr. Lipson. Eric Lipson. Our next speaker is Dan Mishinowitz.
Hi, my name is Dan McNevich. I'm running in Ward 5 for City Council, and I'm here to speak about DC 7, which is about the reliability of DTE's streetlights. I'm also here to speak out against investor-owned energy utilities and in favor of a publicly owned energy utility. So the city owns streetlights too, and like the resolution says, we're already doing a better job than DTE at maintaining this sort of infrastructure. There's implications here when it comes to our public safety, when it comes to the streetlights, and our community's quality of life. You know, they allow us to stay out later and enjoy the outside under safely lit streets. And, you know, it affects the beautification of our city too. I don't think it should come to as a surprise that an investor-owned utility like DTE is not prioritizing the needs of our residents like we can. So I'm in favor of DC 7 and what it's talking about in terms of directing staff into looking into purchasing these streetlights from DTE because we can do a better job. And I think we should, yes, go further, because there are not only implications in terms of public safety when it comes to the streetlights, but if we're talking about being carbon neutral by 2030, we are going to have to deal with the provision and the generation of electricity in this community, and DTE is not going to transition to renewables fast enough to allow us to address the climate crisis at the scale necessary. I've got some time left, so I'd like to also address, I think, what has already been talked about, the elephant in the room. And what I'd say is, like, you can't stay neutral on a moving train, and city staff are making political decisions. I've had political differences from Howard Lazarus's decisions in terms of what was the potential restructuring of solid waste management and what was his stewardship of the creation of the Police Oversight Commission. At the same time, if the city council and if the community are prioritizing things like housing and climate, I don't think that what's going on, this most recent, iteration of what is a political tiff between two factions is going to get our community anywhere closer to addressing the climate crisis or our housing crisis at the scale necessary. My name is Dan McNevich, and I'm running for City Council in Ward 5. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is David Silkworth.
Good evening. I'd like to just make a correction. My speech tonight will be about DC2, the resolution for City Council communications. So my name is David Silkworth. I'm a resident of the 5th Ward, and I'm here tonight to show my support for DC2, the resolution for City Council communications. Our community is facing a wide range of urgent and very important issues, ranging from affordability of housing or just plain living for many of our current residents, to our recently declared climate emergency, to our failing or inadequate infrastructure, and yes, even to some basic quality of life issues. Voters have elected our mayor and city council to represent us, to serve as our policymakers in these matters. And these are complex issues that affect a large and diverse population. So we need leaders who will be thoughtful about how they approach and handle them. It is imperative that our elected officials and city staff have a common understanding of the problems that we face, which includes their ranked importance, so that they might be addressed appropriately in our city's plans, budget, and operations. Folks, we live in a great little city, and there are a lot of really outstanding people working for our city government. For a long time, there has been a real disconnect between what many of our residents want or really need and what has been prioritized. For all these reasons, I believe that we need to do all that we can to improve the communications between our city council and our staff. I urge you to support the resolution for city council communications because we need policies that will foster greater collaboration between all parties, that will improve transparency in how we are governed, and that will ensure the accuracy of information if we're going to meet the challenges that we face. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Joan Lowenstein.
Good evening. I'm a board member of the Washtenaw Housing Alliance. The Affordable Housing Pledge asks you to do as the county and many individuals and organizations have done and commit to the value of affordable housing. It says that housing is a human right, that we must respect renters and improve access to home ownership, and that the market alone cannot meet the needs for accessible, safe, and affordable housing. It's a response to a crisis, no less a crisis than climate change or coronavirus. These are values shared by our community and goals that we need to reach if we're going to paint ourselves as a fair and equitable place to live. I'd like to address some other community values, and here I speak as an individual and a former member of this council. In December 2018, you met for a budget planning retreat, and the staff presented you with a community survey from the fall of 2018 that showed priorities for increased spending. Those were chiefly road resurfacing, drinking water treatment, the Housing Commission, and sustainability in fighting climate change. Administrator Lazarus led the staff in creating a budget that reflected those priorities. Those of you who voted to sabotage funding for water safety, who voted against affordable housing, and voted against budgeting money to fight climate change, do not represent your constituents, and your vote to oust our administrator will show how sorely out of touch you are with community values. We will remind you that such corruption and indifference are unacceptable.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Rebecca Arnitz.
Good evening, City Council. This is James Daniels, my wonderful neighbor, and he is signed up next to speak after me. But in lieu of that, we are going to make a joint statement. I'm speaking on behalf of Chief Michael Cox. I'm going to introduce myself as an Arrowwood resident and someone who has earned the loyalty of my wonderful neighbor, who has started Finding Your Political Voice at Arrowwood, which is a quarterly opportunity for important players in the community come meet our residents, and that is how we met. Backing up, I think it's important to start with gratitude. I'd like to thank Councilmember Ramlawi for expressing interest in having these sort of meetings at Pine Lake Cooperative, which is in his ward. I'd like to thank Councilmember Nelson and Eaton for consistently showing up to these meetings to show their support and help brainstorm with me an idea that we can give back our gratitude to our wonderful first responders by having perhaps an annual banquet at the Michigan Theater, which we are allowed to have 10 events per year for free, to show them our gratitude for showing up for some very difficult situations that none of us would really want to face on a daily basis. When we had our meeting at Arrowwood to discuss with the consultation team what we were looking for in a police chief, I cited examples of my experience working with the AAPD, specifically Sergeant Hickey. I asked for someone who was hopefully a person of color, someone who had experienced diversity, a bridge builder, someone who would equally support officers and community members, and the list went on for 4 pages. When I saw Chief Cox's bio and saw his interview in July, I thought we found our unicorn. I immediately emailed Sergeant Corey Mills, who was fantastic and got right back to me. We held our meeting. You could hear a pin drop. Chief Cox was every bit the leader of integrity I'd hoped he would be, and more. I am greatly, greatly disturbed, greatly disappointed in the way that this man, who has committed to this city from Boston, leaving his wife, who is a doctor, to come here and make a commitment to make our force in our city better, has been treated. And Chief Cox, I want to apologize to you from the city of Ann Arbor. I believe in you, and please don't leave.
Thank you. Our next speaker is James Daniel. Our next speaker is Juliet Pressel.
Good evening. Juliet Pressel, 2625 Lillian, over on the east side. I want to just say before I get rolling that I would encourage all of you up there to speak up, because we can't hear you back there. The only people that I can hear back there are the people who are speaking here, so please speak louder. There are 2 words that prior speakers have used that I want to mention myself. One is disconnect, and one is disturbed. I feel very strongly that when you have somebody of such celebrity coming to Ann Arbor and basically being the face of Ann Arbor to the police staff, to the city, and to people at large, and then suddenly 6 months into his job, he's basically suspended, and no one can know why. That's disturbing. I am not saying that the public deserves to know every detail or even anything that should be kept confidential, but my last information was that nobody on city council knew why our new police chief has been suspended. And honestly, I don't see any good ending to this, because this is an embarrassment. It's an embarrassment to him and to us. And having had some experience with employment law, I know that a complete blackout is not what's called for, especially under the circumstance of this person being a public employee who is responsible to ultimately city council, who has the power to hire and fire him, and I don't know of anybody else who does. You should know what's going on here, because it's either very serious or it's very frivolous. I can't imagine anything in between. And I am disturbed at the lack of communication to the people who need to know, even if I'm not one of them. With regard to that, the term disconnect applies very much to what I see in terms of city communication. And some of the drop balls are normal and natural because everybody has a lot to say and a lot to read, and email is not always the most effective way to communicate. But I do support the DC2 resolution. I kind of wish it were a little stronger because I do feel it needs more specifics, and I do feel that, pardon me, Mr. Lazarus, but I do feel that when the person who is charged with trying to figure out how the communication should be improved is in fact not communicating from my point of view, I don't know how that's going to work. So I want to just encourage you to get more specific in your expectations because there is a disconnect. People on the outside see it. I don't see it in terms of corruption. I see it in terms of dysfunction. Done.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Michelle Hughes.
Hi, I'm Michelle Hughes, and I'm here to talk to you and urge you to vote yes on CA6 and CA7, 2 sidewalks on Barton Drive. In order to meet our city's stated climate goals of carbon neutrality by 2030, we need to create a culture in which non-motorized transit is people's first choice. That means people have to feel that it's safe, easy, and comfortable. The City Council's previously turned down sidewalk projects on Traver and Argo. City Council members from this council table suggested alternate routes that people might take. Now imagine if the city's response to potholes was, well, drivers can just take a different route. We wouldn't find that acceptable, and we shouldn't find it acceptable here. We need to take non-motorized transit at least as seriously as we take driving. We can't ask pedestrians to take another one for the team here. It needs to be comfortable and safe to walk wherever you want to go, and that means we need a robust and complete sidewalk network. So please vote yes on CA6 and CA7. I know that the way that we tax people to build sidewalks is confusing, and there might be some people who weren't aware that they would one day have to pay this tax. And so they might not have planned for it. And I'm sure it's occurred to all of us that it might be convenient never to have to pay your taxes. But paying taxes is how our community runs. It's how we have a fire department, roads, parks, and schools. We could choose not to charge taxes, and we'd have a little more money in our pockets and be a much poorer community. In most cases, the sidewalk taxes will be spread over multiple years in order to ease the burden. Homeowners might also be able to get a home equity loan to spread the payments out further if they need to. And for some people who are having a hard time for paying their property taxes, I'll remind us that they can apply for the property tax poverty exemption, and the Housing Bureau for Seniors can help people with that application. You can call them at 734-998-9339. So I hope you'll avail yourself of the opportunity to vote yes here today on CA6 and CA7 for sidewalks and safe non-motorized transit. While I'm here, I'd also like to urge you to vote yes on DC5, Washtenaw Housing Alliance Pledge. Housing isn't just important, it needs to be a priority. Also, I have here the Fair and Equal Michigan petition to ban discrimination against LGBT people in the state of Michigan. And if any of y'all want to sign it, meet me at the break. If any of y'all want to sign it, meet me over there anytime. And if any of y'all want to sign it, find me somewhere. I try to be everywhere, and hopefully there will be some other Fair and Equal Michigan petition volunteers. Thanks.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Kathleen Stroud. Ms. Stroud. It's all you.
Alternate number one. Kathy Stroud, 2271 Placid Way, Ann Arbor, Michigan. There are so many elephants in this room tonight. But I am here to talk about and to support DC3. Oh, wrong, DC2. DC2. Communication. And we need better communication. And this is just an attempt to put our goals and objectives and guidelines and feet in that direction. And so I just urge you to vote yes on DC 2. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Jeffrey Henney.
Good evening, and thank you for letting me speak as an alternate. I'm here to talk about the City Center Commons resolution, and I've had the privilege of attending the task force meetings that you put in place, which were excellent. There have been very, very productive discussions that have gone on during those task force meetings, at least that I've attended. There's obviously been some disagreements, but those have been worked through. And you will be getting a set of recommendations from that task force very shortly. I've had some input into that, assisting some of the members with some of the ideas and experiences I've had with commenting in Europe in particular. And I would urge you to look at those recommendations and not only support them, but put them in a much larger context. As you may know, the Commons movement is worldwide, and cities all over the world are turning to the Commons, the shared resources driven by bottom-up public projects. They're turning to the Commons as a way to overcome some of the difficulties that we've had throughout history, but certainly in this city, dealing with the sort of polarization, the political polarization, but also the powers of government and the powers of the private sector, which tend to overshadow the ordinary citizen, especially those citizens that do not have privileged access to money and power. The Commons is a way of resolving and dealing with some of that and enabling ordinary citizens to have a much bigger voice in their city and to be able to go down a third pathway in achieving some kind of well-being that is not just the private sector or the public sector, but is a new kind of in-between sector, if you like, a third way. And we've seen this successfully implemented in cities like Ghent in Belgium, Amsterdam in Holland, Seoul, Korea, Barcelona in Spain, and many other places. And I think because we have such amazing talent and open-mindedness in Ann Arbor, that we could become a leader in this movement, this worldwide movement, if we choose to. And so I would ask you to be as expansive in your interpretation of the Commons recommendations that are being put forward by this task force, and think of it as a seed for a much bigger story down the road for Ann Arbor, and a new vision for Ann Arbor, a new development for Ann Arbor, for our children and grandchildren. I feel it addresses many of the issues that have been brought up this evening. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you. Are there communications today from council? Councilmember Eaton. I'm afraid I don't know.
I don't know either, because I called this morning, they told me that was on the agenda, and if that was to be taken off, that they would call me back. No one called me back, so I'm going to speak.
I would make a motion that we waive the rule on the limit on speakers and allow this gentleman to speak.
Okay.
What is,
I'm here to address a comment that Councilmember Hayner made last time I was here about my situation. Let me reiterate my situation. I've had over 200 interactions with the police, law enforcement, 48 of those in Ann Arbor. I've been arrested 4 times, paid thousands of dollars in fines, and I have no criminal record, not even a traffic record. Mr. Hayner, you made a comment out of all council members, which is funny to me because out of all the council members that I spoke to over the years, you are you're one of the few people that I didn't talk to. So it's funny to me that you have a comment about a situation that you have no context or understanding of, which is bringing me to my point today. Well, I have this mask on my face, all these viruses and illnesses going around, sicknesses. China's got coronavirus. China's got coronavirus. America's got old white women and white men talking about things they have no idea about. People are dying for it. And you guys are getting richer and more powerful. I don't see a black face on this council. I'm the only black person that come up here and speak. There's only about 5 or 6 of us in here. Dan, I live in Ward 5, and I can tell you right now, I am not voting for you, because basic human rights being something to decide for you, that's a great thing to know right now. Lum, I heard you're not running again. That's a good decision. Who else is not? You're not running again? That's a good decision. Who else is not running again? I've never spoke to you. You're always quiet. That's a good decision. Grizzle, what are you laughing about? Are you running again? No? I'm not up for re-election. That is a great decision by whoever made that. Mayor Taylor, I hope you resign as well. I've talked to you guys multiple times over the years about this. It's probably going to be the thing that kills me. And you all, you don't give a fuck. You don't care. Thanks.
Thank you. Are there communications from council? Councilor Eaton, you have the floor.
Thank you. I was saddened to see the report about the 19-year-old male student who jumped off one of our parking structures. We, in 2017, passed a resolution urging the DDA to take some efforts to install anti-suicide barriers. And at that time, it was cost prohibitive to do permanent installations, so they did temporary chain link fence. As any kid knows, it's easy to climb a chain link fence, and in this set of circumstances, this young man climbed the temporary barrier and jumped to his death. I hope that the DDA will return to the subject of installing permanent, appropriate suicide barriers. If you look at what Grand Rapids, Michigan has, they have barriers that fold over on itself so that you can't easily climb over the fence. I don't know if that would have prevented this particular jump, but certainly we need to do more than just temporary measures. It's been 2 years and 4 months since we passed that resolution. I think it's time to return to that subject, and I hope that the DDA has the funding to put in a permanent set of structures to thwart these jumps. Thank you.
Further communication from council. Councilmember Lum.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just share that at the same time we're meeting here down in the basement conference room, the Independent Police Oversight Commission is meeting. I assume that they're still meeting. The meeting began at 6 o'clock tonight, and our meetings are not particularly well attended, but tonight's meeting is very well attended. Many members of the community are there to present their concerns to to the Independent Police Oversight Commissioners, to share their concerns about the administrative temporary suspension of Chief Cox. And I did share with the meeting was also attended by council members Eaton and Nelson, and I believe Councilmember Griswold was there as well. I did share with the commission and those in attendance at the meeting downstairs that the next step in this process is that there is, as you know, an ongoing investigation, and the city council is to receive the report of that investigation that is being conducted by an outside independent investigator late tomorrow or early Thursday. And following that, the plan at this point in time is to call a special session and to go in, of city council, and to go into executive session to receive this report ask questions, and then, depending on what that report reveals, make any recommendations relative to Chief Cox. So just wanted to share that update, and it is the ICPOC, sorry for the acronym, Independent Police Oversight Commissions, has significant interest, needless to say, in this report and in understanding fully the recommendations, and so they would like to be apprised of this and also provide their input once that report is made available. Thank you.
Councilmember Bannister.
Yes, I know we've got a lot of events in Ann Arbor, but I wanted to give a shout out to Julie Roth from Ward 1, who reminded me on the email that the A20 initiative, our decarbonization, carbon neutrality by 2030, is having a big town hall this Saturday from noon to 5 o'clock at Pioneer High School. And so I hope all of you can stop by there. I know I'll be there for at least part of the time. And then I also want to remind folks of a couple, 3 ways to participate with council in local government and our decisions. And those are council caucus. We're having council caucus on Sunday nights before these meetings. And so the next one will be March 1st. And then the Sunday after that is March 15, and that's in this room at 7 o'clock on Sunday night, and it's informal, and there's lots of opportunity for you to participate. And then lastly, I just wanted to remind folks that to apply for our numerous boards and commission positions. And you can apply for as many as you want, and then if you're selected, you could decline it at that time, but it's you're welcome to get on the list. Thank you.
Further communication from council. Councilmember Griswold.
I'm going to be bringing forward 3 resolutions, or at least communications. The first one is that council consider adding a second council member to the Transportation Commission. This would be consistent with the Energy Commission and the Environmental Commission. Secondly, we have had 2 deaths related to people crossing the roadway already this year. And I am requesting that council be notified whenever we have a death or serious injury in our roadway or a person who's attempting to cross our roadway. I think that it's a very important issue and that we shouldn't rely on MLive to learn this information. And it's tragic. The last thing is I'm going to ask, and this will be a resolution, that staff evaluate our local crosswalk ordinance, that we consider the crosswalk ordinance in light of the current conditions of our crosswalks, where many of the crosswalks have no lighting or limited lighting. We have a lack of funds for education. There's a lot of confusion about what the local ordinance is. And third, that we benchmark against other Michigan cities that have local ordinances. And just to wrap up, I witnessed a crash on Huron Parkway last week where there were cars in all 3 lanes coming down Huron Parkway. There were 2 people in the median, not close to the crosswalk at all, about 10 feet back from the crosswalk. Suddenly, the car in the middle lane slammed on the brakes and stopped. And everyone just sort of looked at each other. Traffic engineering is about reducing ambiguity. That's why you have green means go, red means stop. What does it mean in Ann Arbor when 2 people are standing 10 feet from the crosswalk? Obviously, only one of the 4 drivers thought it meant stop in this condition, and we really need to reduce ambiguity. Thank you.
Further communication from council. I would like to recommend the following appointments for your consideration to the Board of Review: Ann Harlow, to the Human Rights Commission, Judah Garber, and a resolution for your consideration at our next meeting to appoint Roger On to the Main Street Area Business Improvement Zone Board. May I have a motion, please, to approve the consent agenda? Moved by Councilmember Ramlawi, seconded by Councilmember Griswold. Discussion of the consent agenda. Councilmember Bannister.
Yes, I am not going to request to pull the two Barton sidewalk of CA6 and CA7 because I had the opportunity to talk with Mr. Craig Hoopy and Mr. Nick Hutchinson this morning, and we are going to continue to work on some of the questions about these sidewalks, and they also assured me that if council passes these resolution 2 right now, we still have resolution 3 and 4 where if need be, we can make changes or cancel the sidewalks if need be. So stay tuned for more information on that, but I am not pulling those this evening.
Councilmember Lum.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. No need to pull it out, but I do want to mention CA5, the Board of Insurance recommendations from our January 30th meeting. This item includes the annual renewals of the city's property, casualty, and liability coverages. There are over 10 of them, and the annual premiums total $1.1 million. After about 5 years of flat to declining premiums, our advisor, Highland Insurance, advised us this past summer that the markets for these coverages were challenging. And sure enough, when Highland went out for renewals, the quotes came in 33% higher. Highland did a very nice job working with other insurers, shopping the coverages around, and was able to reduce the increase by about 1/3, but it's still a 20% year-to-year increase. Because of that, the resolution also includes appropriating $150,000 from the risk fund balance. These coverages are necessary to protect the city, and although neither staff or the insurance board were happy about the increases, we recommend council supports these renewals tonight, and we thank Highland for their efforts. Thank you.
Councilmember Hayner.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just real briefly on CA8, I just want to thank everybody for the support on that. We have these as-needed geotechnical and environmental services, and I think we found over the last year that we have needed them, and we even met at a event down by the riverside today where I think we're going to need them again when they start digging up the Allen Creek berm underpass there, and I think they're aware of that. And so I just think I've come to realize how important it is as the city moves forward with these big infrastructure projects that we have somebody ready and able to act and step in, and we saw it with Leslie Science Center and a couple other situations, so I'm happy for your support on that. And then as far as the Barton sidewalks go, CA 6 and 7, we're going to be moving that forward because sidewalks are, they are indeed a public good. I think the problem with the questions that we have about sidewalks is that they kind of exist at this nexus of the public and private goods where, the question is who pays for it and who uses them and who maintains them. And if we recognize that sidewalks are a public good and part of our transportation infrastructure network, which I think we all can accept that they are, then the question arises, then why does only one property owner pay for that one little section of sidewalk? Of course, they're free to use all the sidewalks, and but they also have to maintain that sidewalk in perpetuity. And so I think these questions come up from property owners who are surprised at the cost, surprised at the considerable effort that they might put in for the rest of their lives maintaining these sidewalks and so on. And so I think we need to have a conversation around this maybe as part of our micromobility, or I'm not sure where it's going to fit into all the many transportation gears we have turning here at the city, but I think it's necessary to have that conversation about how are we paying for these sidewalks, and how are we assuring that these sidewalk gaps are filled because it's needed. These sidewalks are needed. They're part of a bigger picture, and they're part of the right path towards our carbon neutrality efforts. So I just wanted to put that forward. Thank you.
Further discussion of the consent agenda? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The consent agenda is approved with 11 council members present, all voting the affirmative, thus satisfying the 8-vote requirement with respect to CA5, CA12. We now come to a set of public hearings. Public hearings are opportunities for members of the public to speak to council and the community about a specific item on the agenda, that is to say, the specific subject matter of that public hearing. To speak at a public hearing, you need not have signed up in advance but your speech must relate to the subject matter of the public hearing. Speakers have 3 minutes in which to speak, so please pay close attention to the time clock. As a matter of courtesy, we may have only one person speaking at a time. And finally, if you require assistance in speaking before council today, we'd be delighted to provide it to you. Public hearing number 1, an ordinance to amend section 1.171 of Chapter 8, Organization of Boards and Commissions of the Code of the City of Ann Arbor. Is there anyone who would like to speak at this public hearing? Seeing no one, this public hearing is closed. Public hearing number 2, resolution to approve the Tapos Night annexation, 1.3 acres, 2731 Newport. Is there anyone who would like to speak at this public hearing? Seeing no one, this public hearing is closed. May I have a motion, please, to approve the regular session meeting minutes of February 3, 2020, moved by Councilmember Grand, seconded by Councilmember Lum. Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Minutes are approved. B1, an ordinance to amend section 1.171 of Chapter 8, Organization of Boards and Commissions of the Code of the City of Ann Arbor, moved by Councilmember Nelson, seconded by Councilmember Eaton. Discussion, please, of B1, Councilmember Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm hopeful about this passing tonight. Since our last meeting when this passed at first reading, I learned that actually Ypsilanti is having a similar conversation to what I raised with this amendment. They're going a bit further. Nothing about my amendment takes the authority away from the mayor to nominate anyone he chooses. Ypsilanti is actually going further, and they're going to have a charter amendment on the ballot that proposes that the mayor can make nominations or 2 council members can make nominations. Again, that would be a charter change, but at any rate, as we passed it at first reading, all this is saying is that a board or commission is going to designate a subgroup of members, including council liaisons, to look at applications, and if they choose, they may present their own recommendations for appointments to that board or commission to the mayor. I think we talked at length about this at first reading. I hope you'll support this. Again, I hope it's not terribly controversial. Thank you.
Further discussion? Councilmember Remlowey.
Thank you. Since no one's chiming in, I'll chime in. And I appreciate the effort by Councilmember Nelson to bring this forward in order to grease the gears a little bit more of these boards and commissions so that they can operate a little smoother. They can request members that they think that would work better and address the needs that they have. And I think this is a move in the right direction. I know, on the Police Oversight Commission, it is up to the liaisons to the Human Rights Commission and the Police Oversight Commission to nominate commissioners to that important body. And I apologize to my colleagues and I apologize to the commission that I wasn't there tonight. It just wasn't going to fit in with everything that was going on today. So I do apologize for not being present. I will be brought up to speed as to what transpired there. And I appreciate Councilmember Lum's update on it during the communications. But back to this, I do think this is a step in the right direction. There's so many different boards and commissions, and there's so much turnover that I think it would be helpful to assist the mayor in getting the information to what types of people could help these boards and commissions achieve their goals. So I appreciate this, and I'll be supporting it.
Further discussion, Councilmember Lum.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I too would like to thank Councilmember Nelson for bringing this forward. And this in no way, which I think is a good thing, impedes the mayor's ability to make nominations and appointments to boards and commissions. But I do think that this is a good ordinance. It makes a lot of sense. Council members sitting on a board know what the board needs in terms of skills and qualifications of its members. So I think it's certainly reasonable and logical and isn't too much to ask for a council member on any given board to review the applications and possibly make recommendations based on their firsthand knowledge, and I just think this would be helpful. So thank you again for bringing this forward.
Further discussion? Councilmember Hayner.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just had a procedural question for the clerk. I know we went around this, and I'm not sure we were satisfied with our solution last week, but I see that we're back to shall for both of them. Is that how we ended up last week? I thought we had a shall and a may in the two, in A
My
and
understanding
B.
was that, well,
I'm just looking at the electronic version in front of me, and they both say shall, and I don't, to be frank, I don't recall. I know I talked about that at length last week, but
It went to May.
I thought it
yeah,
did too.
I don't want to speak out of turn. Yeah, my understanding was, I was paying probably closer attention than anyone just because it was mine. My understanding was that we had shall in the first clause and may in the second.
Shall and A and
Shall
may and B.
And may, yeah.
Yeah,
that was what
okay.
was
The electronic copy's showing two shalls, the version I have anyway.
Call it a scrivener's error.
Really? What is up with my updating?
There's probably a first draft and a second draft.
Okay, well, I just wanted to check, because the one I'm showing on the screen here is two shalls, so thank you for clarifying that.
Further discussion? I'm going to support this as well, of course. This is this is common practice in a couple of boards and commissions. Folks at those, on those boards communicate with me with fair frequency, and others not so much. And so it's, I think it makes a lot of sense to let people know that this is something that is within their ambit. All in favor? Aye. All opposed? It is approved. DC 1, resolution to establish City Council Mobility Committee, moved by Councilmember Griswold, second by Councilmember Bannister. Discussion of DC 1, Councilmember Griswold.
I introduced this resolution with the intent to reduce the crash rate in the city of Ann Arbor, the roadway crash rate. I received feedback about this resolution having some specific language that probably should be staff-generated rather than council policy, and I have revised it based on that feedback. What I want to say is that this is an area where we can improve our effectiveness, we can advocate more efficiently, and we can coordinate with what staff is doing. And a couple of examples of that would be DTE streetlights. We have a resolution later in the agenda, but do we need to raise that to the level of council advocacy and council knowledge that there is an issue? I personally know that there's an issue, but I'm not sure all council members were aware of our streetlight issue, and it is critical, and it impacts the safety of our pedestrians. Another example is the MDOT crosswalk on Huron behind Rackham. I have been verbally assaulted, and I use the term assaulted, because people see me as sort of the face of pedestrian safety, and people are not happy, they are angry, they're afraid that someone is going to be seriously injured or killed again. And I know that our city administrator and our city staff have been working with MDOT. It is a MDOT road. But this needs to rise to a higher level, and we need some serious advocacy by our elected officials to get flashing lights at that crosswalk immediately. So I urge my colleagues to support this.
Councilmember Lum.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Councilmember Griswold. I had concerns about the initial version of this resolution, which we postponed at our last meeting, but this revised version addresses those concerns, and I will be supporting this tonight. With the original version, I was concerned that this was undermining the role of individual council members, but this version makes it clear that's not the case. Engagement as defined here is more about external government entities and neighborhoods and projects. And I appreciate Councilmembers Griswold, Bannister, and Eaton took the time to make the revisions, again, which also largely address the workloads concerns, other concerns I shared raised by staff with the original version. I continue to believe there needs to be further clarification regarding the specific roles and responsibilities of this new committee vis-à-vis the Transportation Commission, but I'm confident that can be worked through and that there's room and a need for both. There have been several transportation and mobility-related issues over the last couple of years where the processes just did not work well. Some examples I'm thinking of include the proposed road diets for Green and Earhart, the proposal to move the Fuller Crosswalk at Huron High School, the proposal to permit parking on Huron, the proposal to eliminate parking at the Catherine lot across from Carytown. I think these examples demonstrate our processes could be improved, especially in terms of neighborhood engagement. This committee may not be the answer to those issues, but it can't hurt and likely could facilitate better engagement at all levels. So thank you again to Councilmember Griswold and the other sponsors for making what I believe are positive revisions to the original version, and I'm happy to support this tonight. Thank you.
Councilmember Ackerman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I find myself agreeing with Councilmember Lum's sentiments, but ultimately won't be voting the same direction as her. I think there are opportunities for improvement in the way that we engage the public and engage residents with respect to transportation projects. I think there's always room for improvement of how we engage the public. I don't think that adding this body is that solution. I think we have two bodies currently that already satisfy this workload. The first is the Transportation Commission, which is a group of citizen volunteers who are themselves transportation experts, who work closely with city staff, professional engineers, transportation experts to review our policies and our plans and put forward recommendations to City Council for our ultimate decision-making. These are residents who volunteer their time. These are residents who have spent their careers and their lives developing educations and work experiences that allow themselves expertise and work closely in coordination with engineers who have the precise technical skills to give us good recommendations. Many of the projects cited just a moment ago went through this process. I think ways in which we engage the public can be done better, but I think the recommendations were sound. They just didn't meet the personal opinions and biases of some individual council members, which is fine, and that's ultimately our authority. I think the second body that already accomplishes this work is the Council's Committee on Policy and Advocacy. We have a subset of this body that meets regularly to discuss what's going on in the county, in the state, and the federal government that affects the way that we do our work, and then advocates to those bodies, helps writes resolutions that City Council reviews and passes along to our state legislatures and our federal representatives. I think we are a bureaucracy. Our job here is to make sure that that bureaucracy does a quality job, and our job is to make sure that the bureaucracy is responsive to residents. I think a bureaucracy works well when it's predictable. Roles are distinct, chains of command are clear, and things get done right and on time as a result. I think bureaucracy works well when it's transparent. Outsiders can easily provide input and oversight. It's clear when there are important decisions to be made, and people know where to insert their viewpoints. And bureaucracy works well when it's responsible and innovative. It stays lean. It doesn't grow unnecessarily so that it can stay responsive and agile to changing needs, and it saves money. Bureaucracy doesn't work well when it creates unnecessary redundancy. This is because redundancy creates confusion about who's responsible for what. Redundancy confuses the public about where advocacy should be directed, and it dilutes the effectiveness of that advocacy when it is delivered. And it wastes money. Asking 2 sets of people to do the same task wastes money. Asking 3 sets of people to do the same task really wastes money. So I can't support this. I think we already have established bodies that accomplish these goals, and I don't want to grow our bureaucracy for no clear reason.
Councilor Grant.
Thank you. I think last time this came forward, my read on it was that if all the words were changed, I would support it. So while I do appreciate that some of the words were changed, and to me this is still an exercise in redundancy. when I look at the committees that are comprised solely of council members, it is typically because we have committees, those committees are meant to do the work of council. The Council Administration Committee, the Council Rules Committee, those are made up exclusively of council members with staff support because they speak directly to the work that we do as a body. In other areas where we need that outside expertise, as I think Councilmember Ackerman already outlined quite eloquently, we bring in those volunteers, and there are costs to that. We have staff time to support those efforts. They often need further information. They're using our city buildings. So while we certainly appreciate the work of those volunteers, there's time associated with it, and their time, which we should recognize that they're giving to the city. So I will certainly not be supporting this. I think that it definitely oversteps our own responsibility. It steps on the work of others, and it's just, it seems completely redundant.
Councilmember Romalowy.
Thank you, Mayor Taylor. I like to push back a little bit on bureaucracy. Bureaucracy actually is full of redundancy. It is the definition of redundancy many times. And so I have no problem with having a second and third layer when it comes to these important decisions. We are being asked to do policy on many different areas, and a lot of these areas interlap, and there's an interrelationship with mobility, whether we're talking about climate action, affordable housing, equity, transportation, of course. So I feel that we're at odds and we're at a disadvantage when things come to us here and some of it hasn't been fleshed out. And then more of what some will describe as dysfunction occurs. I will be supporting this. In fact, I would like to be added as a co-sponsor. I think we need to set policy when it comes to mobility. It's been a mishmash for the last 5-10 years. I apologize. I'm not, blaming anyone or pointing fingers here, but we have a mishmash going on, and it's resulted in a lot of frustration. With all due respect to the Transportation Commission, and a lot of fine members of our community serve on it. But we are elected officials. We are the ones that are being held accountable. We are the ones that get the emails. We are the ones that are told to do something about it. And why haven't you done something about it? Or what are you going to do about it? So I think in the long run, this will help iron out the differences and the wrinkles, the misunderstandings, add the layer of bureaucracy so that when it does come to this table, we have a much more refined policy to approve or not approve. We're all paid salary, so it's not going to add any more cost to anything to have 5 council members meet once a month on this issue. We're not going to be asking for a raise to do that. So I appreciate the concerns of others, but I will support this.
Councilmember Griswold.
I just want to correct a couple of statements, and I'm looking right here at the charter or charge for the Transportation Commission. The Transportation Commission shall consist of 11 voting members. Appointments shall be individuals who, in as far as possible, have an interest in the various forms and modes of transportation. There is no expertise required by members of the Transportation Commission. In fact, it may actually be a negative if you have a lot of expertise. Because the Transportation Commission, and let me be very blunt, because we have people dying in our crosswalk, and we're up here playing a silly turf game and politics. We do not have an engineer on the Transportation Commission. that sits on it, nor do we have a community member who is an engineer, not even a computer science engineer, who has a logical, analytical ability. Because it's much easier to have a commission with an ideological focus if you don't have any analytical people on it. So we have no expertise. And there is a little bit of redundancy. But given our crash rate, are we going to worry about stepping on a few toes? Or should we have all hands on deck and let's get our crash rate down?
Councilmember Smith.
Yeah, I'm not going to be supporting this. What concerns me most about it is, number one, that it's not clear to me when this body goes out and advocates and interacts with other agencies and municipalities, if they are authorized by the entire council or not. And I bring this up because I think we do have a disconnect, is we have a fundamental disagreement on this council about our crosswalk law. Councilmember Griswold and I vehemently disagree on our law. She has lobbied endlessly in Lansing to create a state law that would overturn our local crosswalk law. The issue is our crosswalk law is our policy. And to overturn that policy locally, you need to get 8 votes to overturn a mayoral veto. And to date, that has not happened. So I'm very uncomfortable with setting up a body that can go out and advocate for things that it's not clear that is coming from the body as a whole. That's why I'm not supporting this.
Councilmember Ackerman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The charter language of the Transportation Commission doesn't call for expertise. I know that because I wrote it. But luckily, we live in the most educated city in the country, and as a result, we got applications of incredibly experienced and expert individuals who now comprise the Transportation Commission. And while actually, I'm not even sure it's true that none of them are engineers. I think there is an engineer on the body, but in any case, city engineers attend the meeting regularly along with police officers to give different perspectives of a complex issue, which is how do we make people safer on our public streets and sidewalks. Let's make the assumption that there is an engineer. I'm pretty sure there is. But there aren't any engineers here either. There's a contractor, a financial advocate, an IT manager, a student advisor, a business consultant, 3 lawyers, an urban planner, and a restaurant owner. I don't think any of us are engineers either. And I don't understand how 5 of us in a room are going to be making better decisions than engineers advised by transport experts who are also our constituents and residents. I think what that does is give us more power, which I don't think is actually what we need. I think we need more voices in the conversation, recommending best practices based on experience and expertise in consultation with police officers and engineers who are professionals, trained in educational institutions, other organizations, and certified by state agencies. That's what we need. This distracts from that. This gives us too much power. And this isn't going to keep people safer. It's going to create redundancy, which we should strive to reduce. Just because bureaucracy has redundancy doesn't mean we should perpetuate that. We are here to make sure that this city hall operates as effectively and efficiently as possible to keep people safe and increase quality of life. And just because bureaucracy has a problem doesn't mean that we should perpetuate it. So thank you.
Councilmember Grant.
Thank you. Another reason that I didn't get to mention earlier, and it troubles me that we want to have this layer, and this idea that we keep, that having 5 council members around a table to communicate with different agencies keeps us safer. If we started listening to our engineers more every time they told us to put in a sidewalk or where the bike lane should go, or where we can, how we can help cars drive a little slower, or be aware of where pedestrians and cyclists are in our community, maybe we would actually have fewer crashes. The idea that none of us are aware that, or that not all of us are aware that we have issues with our streetlights in the city is frankly insulting. But I think what we're missing here is that we have the power as council members to do what we were elected to do. I have never at this table turned down an idea that I didn't think was good for the residents of this city. I don't care where it comes from. So if you have an idea to make us safer, you have the power as a council member to bring forward a resolution or to bring forward an ordinance change. And if you can convince a majority of people, or whatever the number required, whether it be 6, 7, or 8 at this table, then do it. And stop complaining that someone's trying to thwart your process or blame someone else for why, or add some layer. Just stop. Actually, I agree with Councilmember Malawi. It's messy, and there's a reason it's confusing, and it's because people who don't have the ideas to bring forward are blaming others. And instead, let's come forward and bring forward ideas if we have ideas about how to work with other agencies or about how to keep us safer. And if you bring that forward, and I think it will actually keep people safer, I will be first in line to support it.
Councilmember Hayner.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm kind of ambivalent on this because I sit on 7 council assignments already, and it's 8 if you count my card group out in Scioto Township there fighting for the Gelman issue, the Gelman cleanup. And so, I wouldn't be thrilled to putting my name in the hat of being 5 of 11 that have to sit on another board or commission. And I know not everybody has this many, and I took it upon myself to have those assignments, and I'm happy to serve in, in those roles. But I don't see a real problem with giving additional consideration to these projects that are out there in the community. And if a little bit later on, we're going to be speaking to, we're going to accept the clerk's report, and underneath the clerk's report under F1 is something that's innocuously titled 2019 Annual Report, which could be an annual report from anything. But what it is an annual report from the Transportation Commission, which is not titled properly, in my opinion. I hope that I don't know what the mechanism is for changing that, but before that's entered into the record, I think it should be titled properly so that people can find it, so that the public can find it. That's the important thing. We talk about transparency, and here we have an annual report from the Transportation Commission that isn't titled properly. So be that as it may, but the reason I bring that up is because there are things in that annual report, if you read through it, that kind of make statements that really aren't accurate. Like one is, a number of city council members have promoted House Bill 4738 despite it being in direct conflict with the will of the Ann Arbor public. Well, that's a bold statement for a commission to make, that they are assessing the will of the public. And frankly, I think it's city council representatives' job to assess the will of the public and bring it forward. And so I appreciate that they're adamant about protecting this local crosswalk ordinance. But I think that, that's suggesting that they had their finger on the pulse of the public is a reach. And so I believe that's where the origin of this resolution that's before us now comes from, that there's concerns that there are these many small bodies operating here inside city council, with or without the knowledge of the council body as a whole, that are making decisions and assumptions that may or may not be based in reality. And, it's true, and you pointed it out, the only reason we have this crosswalk law that people are so adamant about the value to our community, even though it statistically isn't shown to be so, it only exists because of a veto. There were people who said, we don't want this crosswalk law, we want to make a minor change to it to keep it more in line with the trends of the state. And John Heath, you vetoed that, and there weren't 8 to override that. And so I think the crosswalk law itself exists on this kind of political fringe, and I certainly support the notion that state laws that are taught by the bodies like the Secretary of State who issue driver's licenses are probably of a greater value to the whole than individual laws in each city. But we're not here to discuss that. We're here to discuss this resolution. And so I don't see a problem with having more heads in the mix and more minds thinking about these projects. We're going to operate outside of these other groups. They're free to operate with their own autonomy, issue their own annual reports. I don't see a problem with that. The fact that some people are so interested in enshrining that advocacy with certain groups is a bigger concern to me. Thank you.
Further discussion? Councilor Lum.
Appreciate everyone's feedback, and I am all for a leaner bureaucracy, if you will. And this does add another layer, and I would hope going forward that no matter the mobility issue or concern, that each respective council member will have the opportunity, the ability to interact as they do today with their constituents and advocate for their constituents. And to that end, I will just also share that when council members are criticized for not supporting a given, say, staff recommendation, for questioning a staff recommendation, I really don't think that's fair. I think that's a council member, that council member who questions, who advocates for a different approach, is doing their job. And this criticism is also not applied uniformly. For example, with the Ben-Hur of a solid waste study that we just completed, which I supported, okay, that was a compilation of a lot of excellent staff work and recommendations. And the same folks sitting at this table who criticize council members one day or night for not supporting and for questioning staff recommendations in the mobility universe had no issue with not supporting recommendations that came from this solid waste consultant study, which was exhaustive and very thorough. So, you know, I think it depends on the dog food. You know, if you don't like the dog food, then it is or isn't okay to criticize your colleagues for supporting a staff recommendation or not. And I just, you know, I that lack of consistency I find obviously concerning and troublesome. And so on this, I again just would encourage this, if this passes, that the council members continue to take a deep dive in any mobility issues that in particular impact the areas, their neighborhoods that they represent. That's us doing our jobs. Thank you.
Further discussion? I'm going to vote against this, and then I have to figure out what to do about that next. I have some real concerns about the way that this overlaps with the work perceived in actual, or the role of the Transportation Commission. We, I think, we owe our resident volunteers, we owe our community volunteers, you know, honor and respect, and I'm not sure that that the thrust of this conversation achieves that. With respect to the particulars of the actual language, it's both, I think, overreaching and a little and peculiarly limited. The first resolve clause establishes the committee. The second resolve clause says that it's going to advise the council. Okay. The third resolve clause says that it documents engagement rather than actually doing engagement. Fourth resolve clause says that staff is going to report about engagement. It's so opaque that, I think it's at risk of extending beyond its scope. I am most concerned with resolve clause number 3. We already have representatives on SEMCOG, council representatives on SEMCOG, council representative available to go to Watts, Spark, DDA. We have people that, staff members that work with MDOT all the time, staff members and, you know, and us as elected officials all the time engaging with folks from the University of Michigan. people engaging and working with members of the Washtenaw County Commission. Delegating that to a number of council members in connection with mobility, I think, undercuts our ability to act, undercuts staff's ability to do their job, and, I think would achieve a real disservice. Further, it is true that we are not going to be paid any extra in the event that some of us sit on a mobility committee. However, if we're going to expect staff to show up with anything besides, a pen and paper to take notes, that has real cost. And, we're not, do you want engineers coming and showing us all the mobility-related projects that are ongoing? Are we going to have this committee run through the policies with respect to bike lanes and sidewalks and streetlights? If we are, then that's a heavily staffed function. If we're not, goodness, what's the point? DC 7, I think, is a perfect example of what interested council members can do on their own initiative to affect change and action in this area. It's not rocket science. You come up with an idea, you have to put together a resolution, ask council members to support it. It seems pretty simple. And the structures created by this committee, I think, undercut our ability to do our work, undercut staff, and undercut the community volunteers that we've asked to staff the Transportation Commission. Further discussion? Councilmember online. Oh, I'm sorry, Councilmember Hayner.
Just clerical mention that before we vote, we should, in whereas clause 4 and 6, there's a typo at the start of both those. I think it could be go down as a Scrivener's error, where instead of saying Ann Arbor, it says Arbor.
Thank you. Councilmember Ramlawi.
Appreciate the second time to talk on this. We're all here, we all come from different backgrounds. In fact, it was one of my campaign points was that we needed more diversity on this council before 2018. And I'll stand by that. And it has obviously been tumultuous at times, but we're fleshing things out. We're having open, honest discussions for many of these issues, and questioning where we stand and being challenged to why we've taken things and being forced to explain them. And I'm fine with that. But this discussion that this committee would somehow undermine the Transportation Commission, where is that spirit coming from? I don't understand that. I just feel like that isn't where this is coming from, and it's being portrayed in a negative light. This should help the Transportation Commission if we're doing our jobs. And I'll push back on one of my colleagues. When I'm up here, I'm not a restaurant owner. I'm an elected official. I'm not up here selling food right now. I'm here serving my constituents. Thank you.
Further discussion? Perhaps Councilmember Raleigh raised an interesting question. May I have a motion? Would someone consider putting forward a motion to refer this to the Transportation Commission for their review? Further, is there a second? No second. Further discussion? Roll call vote, please, starting with Councilmember Bannister.
Councilmember Bannister?
Yes.
Councilmember Griswold?
Yes.
Councilmember Lum?
Yes.
Councilmember Graham?
No.
Councilmember Ackerman?
No.
Mayor Taylor?
No.
Councilmember Eaton?
Yes.
Councilmember Nelson?
Yes.
Councilmember Smith?
No.
Councilmember Ramlawi?
Yes.
Councilmember Hayner?
Yes.
Motion carries.
DC 2, resolution for City Council Communications, moved by Councilmember Griswold, seconded by Councilmember Eaton. Discussion, please, of DC 2. Councilmember Griswold.
I'll just say that this has been revised significantly, and it now has the support of the city administrator and the city attorney. So, given the time and how much we've spent on the other resolution, this is pretty straightforward. I think we can all agree tonight that there's always an opportunity to improve our communications, and that's all I'll say.
Further discussion? All in favor?
I want a roll call.
I'm sorry, roll call vote, please, starting with Councilmember Bannister.
Councilmember Bannister?
Yes.
Councilmember Griswold?
Yes.
Councilmember Long?
Yes.
Councilmember Grant?
No.
Councilmember Ackerman?
Yes.
Mayor Taylor?
Yes.
Councilmember Eaton?
Yes.
Councilmember Nelson?
Yes.
Councilmember Smith?
No.
Councilmember Remlawi?
Yes.
Councilmember Hayner?
Yes.
Motion carries.
C3, resolution urging the city to compile and disseminate educational and outreach materials about integrated pest management, IPM, best practices, and turf grass reduction strategies to owners of turf grass within the city. Moved by Councilmember Bannister, seconded by Councilmember Smith. Discussion, please, of DC3. Councilmember Bannister.
Okay. There's a lot of people to thank on this resolution, and this is part 2 in the series. You all may recall last July when Elena DeRiggi, Ward 1 resident, brought forth the idea to the Environmental Commission that we would urge the Washtenaw County Road Commission to reduce herbicide spraying along the roadside. And so we passed that and sent it on over to the Washtenaw County Road Commission, and at that time, we promised that we would come back and expand that, which is what we're seeing tonight, where, again, Elena DeRiggi and others, Rita Mitchell, Christopher Graham, Missy Stoltz, Emily Drennan, the whole Environmental Commission, we put a lot of thought into this idea, and what we're planning, it's an education and outreach resolution where we would use existing policies from the integrated pest management program of the Natural Area Preservation Group and our Parks Department, and include those materials in more of our existing outreach, incorporated into already existing outreach events and departmental communications. So the staff time and expense would be minimal, and so the idea is that pesticides, including herbicides, fungicides, and insecticides that are used on turf grass are harmful to wildlife and bees and pollinators and humans. And so we're going to try and encourage residents and large owners of turf grass properties to look at alternative methods.
Christopher. Councilmember Smith.
Jackie, could you please add me as a co-sponsor? I missed the deadline on that. I'd just like to say thank you to all of the citizen volunteers and the Environmental Commission for all of the work that you put in getting us this point. It's greatly appreciated. This moves us forward in a significant way. Thank you.
Councilmember Eaton.
I'd like to be added as a co-sponsor as well, please.
Further discussion. Councilmember Hayner.
Well, thank you. I too would like to co-sponsor and thank my colleagues Smith and Bannister for their work on EC on this, and also to follow up on a speaker's suggestion that I don't know the mechanism for this, but I think it is appropriate, and I think that the science points to the notion that some of these chemicals that we use in our environment are pretty bad. Roundup's pretty terrible. It's excessive, and our Parks and Rec Department and our staff at the golf courses and so on have done an amazing job of reducing our use over hundreds and hundreds of acres to really very little, hardly any at all. And if we can do it, everybody else can too. And you know, our parks and our golf courses are excellent and award-winning. And so I think it's appropriate that we have a third round of this. And I'm also considering revisiting the changes that were, you know, made about, what, it's been 6, 7 years now, to Chapter 40, 316, which talks about the turf grass heights and so on. Because what we really want to get back to is encouraging natural environments. I've seen in European cities and other cities here in the United States that they are encouraging and even paying residents to replant their yards with pollinator-friendly type gardens and I think that's entirely appropriate and necessary now that bumblebees and so on are on the endangered species list. And as we all know, when the bees go, they're taking us with them. And so that's not good news. And so I'm going to take a hard look, and hopefully I can get something over to EC and work with you folks a little better to take a look at Chapter 40 and some other ways to encourage different kinds of looking at our somewhat built environment, or I guess you'd call it the environment that's between natural and built. And really people sending their front yards and their backyards in the right direction, that's better for everybody. So I'm a big supporter of this, and thank you.
Councilmember Ackerman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thanks to Councilmember Bannister and Councilmember Smith, our two liaisons to the Environmental Commission, itself, and to the staff that will implement this. About a year ago, I had a constituent reach out with asthma who was dealing with a neighbor who was spraying pesticide on their lawn. And really quickly, when you're trying to do that kind of constituent service, you run into bad state law that just says local municipalities cannot regulate these types of things. And this public education campaign trying to encourage our neighbors not to use these dangerous chemicals, dangerous for the environment, but also dangerous for their neighbors who have health issues, is super important. So thanks for this step forward.
Further discussion? Councilmember Remlowing.
Thank you. Just echoing the comments that have been made by my colleagues, this is obviously a great step forward in getting to where we need to be. And to be honest with you, I'm surprised this hasn't already been done. So I do appreciate the work by the community and by the members of this board. And just wanted to say that out loud. Thank you.
Further discussion? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? It is approved. DC4, resolution to revise 2020 council calendar, moved by Councilmember Eaton, seconded by Councilmember Nelson. Discussion, please, of DC4. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? It is approved. DC5, resolution to adopt the Washtenaw Housing Alliance's Affordable Housing Pledge, moved by Councilmember Grand, seconded by Councilmember Ackerman. Discussion, please, of DC5. Councilmember Ackerman, Grand.
Thank you. I'm honored to bring this forward tonight with Councilmembers Ackerman and Mayor Taylor. This is a much broader effort that's being spearheaded by the Washtenaw Housing Alliance, and they are circulating throughout our community an affordable housing pledge. At the last meeting of the Ann Arbor Housing Commission, they're trying to get both individuals and organizations to sign on, so I encourage everyone in our community to please do so. The Ann Arbor Housing Commission unanimously signed on and made the request of me as their liaison to bring this forward to our council so that we as an organization can also support it, and I hope that you'll join me. Right now, there are more than 20 organizations and hundreds of individuals who signed this pledge, and I think the values that it represents are in line, hopefully, with where we can make a commitment to go forward with where we want to see ourselves going in terms of addressing the housing crisis in our community. In voting to support this resolution, we'll be confirming our commitment to a diversity of housing types, to urban density, to understanding that the market alone cannot take care of this problem, and that we have a very important role to play in addressing this crisis. We'll be looking at housing and confirming that we want to look through housing through this lens of improving social, economic, racial equity. And while we may take steps to increase home ownership, especially for certain marginalized populations or low-income individuals, this also makes a statement about valuing the contribution of renters and supporting the rights of tenants in our community, among other important values. So I just thank the WHA for their work. I know we have lots of, some board members and staff from that organization who are here tonight who probably could answer questions better than I could if you have them. And I hope you'll join me in supporting this.
Councilmember Ackerman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Councilmember Grand, for bringing this from the Housing Commission's board on which you serve. And thanks to the Washtenaw Housing Alliance for putting this together and for your advocacy and rallying different groups behind this pledge. If you don't know, the Washtenaw Housing Alliance strives to end homelessness in Washtenaw County. They partner closely with the county government and local municipalities within Washtenaw County to enact policies that help accomplish that goal. Tonight's measure is symbolic. It's 7 commitments to the community about how we stand for and are allied to affordable housing and those initiatives. I think it's an important gesture, but a gesture that hopefully passes tonight and needs to be backed up with ongoing action over the course of the next 5 years in particular as we weigh and make decisions on building affordable housing on publicly owned land across the city. Thanks.
Councilor Romano.
Appreciate, I'm sorry, give it to Smith and then come back to me.
Sorry, Councilor Smith.
Please add me as a co-sponsor, and Ms. Carlisle, I'm glad to see you here. I would be happy to sign this pledge individually as well. I encourage all of us to do that.
Councilor Romano.
Well, thank you. And I also would like to be added as a co-sponsor to this. I appreciate Councilmember Grand and Ackerman bringing this forth in the Washtenaw County Housing Alliance. This is a serious pledge, one that, again, I've said it before and I'll say it again, is all we have in this life is your word. And taking this pledge, I believe all our decisions, my decisions, will have this embedded in it, and I'll be looking through those votes with this. It goes back to the last major significant pledge, which was the climate emergency. So when we take these pledges, they're not taken, I don't take them lightly. I'll add myself, and I appreciate the opportunity to be added as a co-sponsor. But I also want to caution the fact that we still need to operate within our city charter. We still need to operate within our master plan. And those are pledges that I also made. And so I don't want to be attacked later on, and this ain't going to stop it, I'm sure. But even with taking this pledge and sponsoring it, there are still other documents that need to be recognized and upheld. And I think both can be done, and that's why I feel comfortable making this statement. And thank you once again.
Councilor Hayner.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I have no doubt that the body will support this and will be on the record as supporting this pledge. You know, it's, as others have suggested, that, you know, words are just words, right? And so unless we back this up, it's meaningless. And we don't want to cheapen our words. What we have, was it 2014, we had a pledge to end homelessness? And I went through that, it's about 170 pages, I think it was. And you know, a lot of information in there, a lot of people's contact information, and who was going to do what and reach on that. And we have made progress in that area, but, you know, homelessness isn't over yet here in the county and the city. And so, you know, that's a pledge that took a lot of action behind it. And this one will too. And I have no doubt that we'll pass this. I don't agree with everything in here. I don't think anybody can agree with everything that's in here. I think that I have some problem with the way it enshrines value in certain urban planning fads. And I'm not a fan of public-private partnerships. And it discusses investing with developers, albeit only those who make guarantees to, you know, maintain affordable housing in perpetuity. But we've seen how those haven't worked out for us, you know. And so I have concerns about some of the language in this, but certainly not enough that it would be, you know, the kind of thing that we wouldn't want to support. And so I appreciate folks bringing this forward. I really want to back it up. I mean, we made pledges to provide X number of units every year, and we really haven't done it. We just haven't done it, and it's disappointing for me. I've done some things while I've been here on council to push that forward. I'm you know, real happy with our work to explore these 11 city-owned properties. I think it's a real step forward for us as a community. But, you know, I want to do more. I want to be able to say that I really did something about this. And so I know Councilmember Ackerman, I saw some stuff floating around where we're going to take a look at these duplex options when people come into the city. I think that's awesome. I think we're going to look at, you know, we want to send back some other things for reevaluation. You know, ways to get new forms of housing and new land use that are appropriate and kind of tick all the environmental and community buttons that are really good for all. I think it's perfectly appropriate to do that. So I just, you know, we'll take this pledge, but I urge us all to work diligently to see it through to the end. Thank you.
Councilor Griswold.
I'd like to be added as a co-sponsor. two issues. One is I am personally involved in homelessness. I worked with a young person in their 20s who was homeless for over 2 months before he went to the Galana Center, and then housing was found. I'm also working with an 18-year-old girl who has been couch surfing since October, is on the wait list for Ozone House, and I call at least twice a week and plead with them to move her up on the wait list. So homelessness is a real issue in this community. The last thing I'll say is we need to find creative, smart ways to add housing without making home ownership less affordable for those with fixed incomes and those that are just barely scraping by. Thanks.
Councilman Long.
I do support this, and I appreciate my colleagues, council members, Grant and Akron, bringing this forward. I will just say, too, and as has been noted previously, that as with anything, the devil is in the details, and there are things here that this is largely symbolic in a nice, positive way, and when when time comes to approve projects to achieve the beliefs outlined in this pledge, that we'll need to exercise flexibility and kind of take things on a case-by-case basis. For example, the explanation for belief number 3 states that affordable housing should be targeted for households with incomes up to 60% of AMI for renters. Last week, I attended a DDA meeting, and they're approving some recommendations for affordable housing, and at that meeting, there was the concern was expressed and shared by members of the DDA that more flexibility in the AMI target range is needed to enable us to provide more housing for more workforce housing, just because the cost of housing is so costly. And of course, it's important to assist people at the lower income end of the spectrum, but the reality is too, at the same time, which we also have to appreciate, as difficult as it is that in order to provide workforce housing, we might have to look at other ranges. And again, this was a point that was made at this DDA meeting and is being confronted, and the DDA will be trying to address. So, but thank you again for bringing this forward, and I, of course, will support it.
Further discussion? I'm delighted to bring this forward as well with my colleagues, and I'm glad to hear that it is obtaining broad support. I will note and observe that putting this pledge into effect will require disruption. Disruption is not something that we do very well in Ann Arbor, but it's something that we're going to need to do if we're going to solve this terribly large structural problem. Business as usual will not be acceptable. The city as we know it is not working for everyone, and in order to change that, in order to affect the goals articulated here, in order to bring the values to life articulated here, things are going to have to be different. And that's something that we need to be candid about, and it's something that we need to have the stomach to implement when the time comes. I just want that firmly stated as we go forward and make this commitment. And I should say with particularity, in my view, that means that we need to be privileging people over cars. In my view, it means that density is something that we need to countenance in areas where it has previously not been acceptable. It means that connectivity between residential units has to be privileged. It means we need to look at transportation and transportation corridors and provide density, substantial density at those locations. These are things that we need to take care of if we're going to achieve the goals that are articulated here and are articulated in our other plans. And it's going to mean doing things differently, and I'm looking forward to that. Further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? It's approved. DC 6, resolution to approve an amendment number 1 to the Veterans Treatment Court Grant Agreement with the Michigan Supreme Court State Court Administrative Office and appropriate funds in the amount of $10,000. Moved by Councilmember Eaton, second by Councilmember Smith. Discussion of DC 6?
I'd like
Pardon me,
to be
Councilman
added
Reed.
as a co-sponsor on this.
Further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? It's approved. Let's take a short break. We are back after a short break. It is observed that I forgot to observe that DC 6 was passed with 11 council members present, all voting in the affirmative, thus satisfying the 8-vote requirement with respect to DC 6. DC 7, resolution concerning the reliability and functionality of Detroit Edison streetlights. Moved by Councilmember Grand, second by Councilmember Griswold. Discussion, please, of DC 7. I guess I'd like to say that it's been observed, of course, that and has been bemoaned over the many years that DTE owns a majority of the streetlights here in the city of Ann Arbor, and that they do not maintain them in a manner that is acceptable. They do not permit us to utilize LED technology to save costs, to save energy, and we wish it were differently. As a consequence, what we're going to be doing here, if this resolution passes, is making sure that we have an inventory of streetlights that exist. We're going to be making sure that we understand the streetlights that are out, and we're going to be working with our partners throughout the state in order to hopefully effect a mechanism by which we can efficiently, properly, and in a cost-effective manner overtake the ownership of these streetlights. We expend a great deal of money every single year maintaining our streetlights, energizing the streetlights. If we were able to have control over this resource, we would be far better off economically and far better off from the perspective of safety. And so I'm delighted to be helping bring this resolution forward, and I'm grateful to the city administrator and others who helped its conception and its execution. Further discussion, Councilmember Lum.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm delighted you brought this, that you're delighted that you brought this forward, because I'm delighted you brought this forward. So thank you. Would like to have my name added, if that's acceptable to you, as a sponsor. It's good of you to place this on the agenda. The city does work hard to replace street outages promptly and to do preventative maintenance, and there's no reason DTE can't and shouldn't do the same. I agree with the first resolve clause that it's really is unacceptable that DTE isn't assigning and allocating the necessary level of resources required to do the job. I'm okay with looking into perhaps purchasing the streetlights, but honestly, it seems to me that the better outcome is for DTE just to do their job and replace outages promptly. So thank you again for bringing this forward.
Further discussion, Councilmember Griswold.
Yeah, I believe this is an important first step. I would also like to see a future resolution that looks at moving towards more energy efficient lighting as well as solar lighting. I hate to micromanage, but I would like a report on mean time between failure, because I'm very concerned that some of the street lights that are the new LED lights, especially on the Fuller corridor, are only remaining lit and functioning for a few months. And we were told that the LED lights are going to have a much longer lifespan than the other lights. I would also again like to remind everyone listening, if you see a street light out, please report it through A2 Fix It, because we don't have a way of proactively knowing that the street lights are out. That's another example of technology. Long term, we'll have a network and we'll be able to know if a light is not functioning and drawing electricity. So please report those to A2 Fix It. Thank you.
Further discussion, Councilmember Smith.
Number one, please add me as a co-sponsor. Number two, anybody that knows me knows of my disdain for DTE. I am extremely troubled by their relationship with us. Case in point, the Evergreen Circuit on the west side of town was neglected and not upgraded for a number of years. Their response was to blame homeowners for not trimming trees when they hadn't done any maintenance or upgraded their equipment. I believe we need to do everything we can to hold them accountable for their lack of following through on what they're supposed to do. They are a public utility. We don't have any choice, and I was thrilled to see this come forward.
Councilmember Malawi.
Thank you, and if it's okay with the sponsors, I'd like to be added as a co-sponsor. I think this will help in achieving our goals for carbon neutrality. It does not seem to many of us that DTE has taken this issue seriously enough, powering electricity with renewables. This would help us in achieving that, using our municipal use and being able to use renewable energies to power those street lamps. So in addition to the unreliability of DTE to maintain their infrastructure, this will also help us power the street lamps, hopefully with renewables, something that DTE is dragging, kicking and screaming their way into doing it. So I appreciate the work that's put into this, and it's definitely a step in the right direction.
Further discussion? Councilmember Bannister.
Just thank you for bringing this forward, and I would also like to add my name. Thank you.
Further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? It is approved. DC 8, resolution to conclude the employment agreement with City Administrator Howard S. Lazarus. Moved by Councilmember Eaton, seconded by Councilmember Lum. Discussion, please, of DC 8. Councilmember Eaton.
If you would, thank you. This resolution approves a separation agreement between the city and our city administrator. The separation agreement is really the culmination of a very long discussion that we have had that really began shortly after we learned that the city administrator did not get a job that he applied for in Gainesville. In the negotiation of the settlement agreement, the city administrator has asked that we not discuss the details of the reasons why we're seeking the separation, and I'd like to respect that. I would like to show him the respect of a dignified departure. While the council is concluding his employment without cause under the contract, that's mostly because we don't wish to state those causes, and we don't wish to engage in prolonged litigation over whether or not cause existed. So it's really of mutual benefit to the city administrator and the city to conclude this through negotiation rather than acrimony and litigation. I hope that we will show him the respect that he deserves. He has served us for nearly 3 years, and I respect that service, and I wish him the best in the future.
Further discussion? Councilmember Lum.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Councilmember Eaton. And I'd like to say first, regardless of how this turns out this evening, I'd like to thank you, Mr. Lazarus, for your 3+ years of service to the city. Much has been accomplished during your tenure, and you should be very proud of that. The resolution we're voting on now does two things. It concludes Mr. Lazarus's employment as of February 29th, and it also approves, as noted by Councilmember Eaton, a separation and release agreement. The separation agreement is fully consistent with Mr. Lazarus's employment contract. He will receive a severance payment of 1 year's salary, as well as a $1,000 payment and the unused sick and vacation time that he has earned. This is obviously a difficult situation for Mr. Lazarus and an important decision for council, one that I am certain all of my colleagues have thought through very carefully. And I'm hopeful that the discussion tonight, and I trust that it will reflect that and will be respectful. I don't believe it's appropriate to go into specific details about our city administrator or his performance. I won't do that. I know it is fair, however, for anyone to ask why I would vote for this, and I will try to be succinct and honest. Clearly, I have come to the conclusion and believe that the interests of the city are served by a change in leadership and a new direction. And in my view, I don't think that the current relationships between ourselves and the city administrator are what they should be. I've served on council a long time and with quite a few city administrators. And I've seen the evidence that council administrator relationships are important to the effective functioning of city government, both internally and externally. I've seen positive relationships and not so positive ones. We all want to support and promote relationships that are healthy and what you would expect and see on a high-performing team. Assigning blame for less positive or productive relationships is not positive, obviously, or productive, but we all want to do what's best for our city to effectively meet the significant challenges that we face. And then finally, a comment on why this was added to the agenda today rather than last week with our other items. Folks have written to us and suggested that this was not a transparent action and that we did not want to hear from our constituents. It's a separation agreement, and it was imperative that this be reviewed and approved thoroughly by our city attorney, Mr. Lazarus, and his counsel. And in addition to that, we made the decision to add the item today, an item that was discussed with our city administrator last week, because we thought it was in primarily his best interests as well. As you can see from the comments Mr. Lazarus kindly provided at the start of the meeting, he's taking the high road. That's to your credit, certainly, knowing how difficult this is, and we also need to follow your example. Again, regardless of what happens tonight, I would like to thank my colleagues for their careful consideration, and thank you, Mr. Lazarus, for your service to our city. Thank you.
Further discussion? Councilor Nelson. Councilman Nelson.
I just want to personally thank Mr. Lazarus for his commitment to the city, and I also wanted to comment how much I have appreciated the conversations that we've had one-on-one about your experiences in Austin, and I like to imagine that where you land next, you'll be able to have similar conversations about experiences that you had in Ann Arbor. Thank you.
Further discussion? For my part, in keeping with Mr. Lazarus's wishes, at this time I will say merely that I place a very, very high value on his service. And I very much wish that he would remain here in Ann Arbor to continue with that service. And then I will be voting no this evening. Councilmember Grant.
Thank you. Also in keeping with those wishes, I will save most of my comments about this situation for another time.
Please. Order, please. Councilmember Grant.
I will.
Ma'am. Councilmember Grant.
There's no corruption.
Okay. As I was saying, I'll just start over. I will be voting no for this evening. I'm incredibly disappointed with this decision. I do have concerns about what this means for us as a council, what this means for us as a city, and for our staff to be able to follow through on priorities going forward. But mostly I want to give Mr. Lazarus his due, and with the really wise words and reminding us why we're all here this evening, which is to serve the public. it would be my wish for him to serve us for much, much longer, so I will be voting no.
Further discussion? Councilmember Hayner.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think it's legitimate that people in the crowd are concerned about what's happening here. And I will express my own concerns to share with them. I mean, if you look at what's happening here, it's not great, but as the sponsors pointed out, there's personnel matters that are, don't allow us to speak to some certain issues publicly. I have concerns about, and I'm just going to reiterate concerns that I have gotten from my constituents. There's concerns about the expense. Is this best for the city? There are many concerns about transparency. I have my own concerns about the ideas that Mr. Lazarus has been brought forward and that he's been working with staff on, and the work product that he's produced in his 3 years here. That's of value to us, obviously, because we pay handsomely for that work. And, the notion that there's some kind of displeasure with the direction, I think that it falls to us to see what that direction is. And I'm certainly sympathetic with the public who feel perhaps cheated out of their opportunity to opine on this matter. And I've always been a advocate for free speech on these issues and for openness and transparency. And I find that the position that I find myself in here as counsel, as part of this body, and under the employment rules that I have, and this is one of the 2 employment relationships that City Council has, that there's not much I can do to increase the transparency around this matter, and for that I apologize. And I think we've done some decent work, and we're in the middle of our evaluation of their 2 employees, the city administrator and the city attorney. And I was hopeful that that process would have a decent outcome. So no matter what happens, I do want to thank Mr. Lazarus for his service and wish him well no matter what as my neighbor, because from all accounts, he's a good neighbor too. Thank you.
Further discussion? Councilmember Griswold.
2 things. One is that this process is being very respectful of Mr. Lazarus, and I want to thank him for his service to the community. It would be very disrespectful, given that this is a personnel issue, to communicate all of the details with all of the community. That's not how human resource issues are handled. Secondly, Mr. Lazarus has agreed to continue through February 29th. To have a very contentious event happening tonight will simply make that harder for the community to move forward. And again, it's fine that you want to be disrespectful to council, but please don't be disrespectful to Mr. Lazarus.
Councilmember Smith.
I was struck by something, Howard, that you said in your opening remarks, and that was you're talking about joy and joy of public service. And I can tell you that in my brief career of public service here, it has been an absolute joy to work alongside of you. Hard to find much other joy right now. I'm not going to support this, and I'm not going to say anything else about it right now.
Further discussion? Councilmember Bannister.
Yes, I also want to thank Mr. Lazarus for working with me over these last few years. I believe I've been through 3 evaluation cycles, and I want to wish you well in your next endeavor. And I apologize to the residents that we aren't at liberty to talk about personnel issues in detail. But for all the folks who emailed today expressing support for Mr. Lazarus and concern that his departure would somehow derail our climate action and carbon neutrality efforts, I want to assure you all that I strongly believe that this council will continue on our path of carbon neutrality and climate action, and I personally will continue to the extent of my service to continue to move the city forward. Thank you.
Further discussion? Councilmember Ackerman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Lazarus, your career has been an inspiration to us all to strive, not for personal gain, but for the benefit of the public. You're a retired Army officer. You've served as a senior engineer at the City of Newark, the City of Austin, and now the City of Ann Arbor. Your track record in public service is a storied and successful one, and we appreciate this chapter in it. So thank you. I will be voting no.
Further discussion? Roll call vote, please, starting with Councilmember Bannister.
Councilmember Bannister?
Yes.
Councilmember Griswold?
Yes.
Councilmember Lum?
Yes.
Councilmember Grand?
No.
Councilmember Ackerman?
No.
Mayor Taylor?
No.
Councilmember Eaton?
Yes.
Councilmember Nelson?
Yes.
Councilmember Smith?
No.
Councilmember Ramlawi?
Yes.
Councilmember Hayner?
I think this is outrageous. Yes.
Motion carries.
It's all right.
DB1, resolution to approve the Tapos Night annexation of 1.3 acres, 2731 Newport. Moved by Councilmember Ackerman, seconded by Councilmember Smith. Discussion? Councilmember Ackerman.
Because of scheduling conflicts, planning staff wasn't able to be here. This is a straightforward annexation of a single-family home. If you have questions, feel free to postpone.
Further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? It is approved. DS1, resolution to approve $5,000 from general fund to fund additional tasks associated with the Comprehensive Transportation Plan Update Project, and to approve an amendment to the professional services agreement with Sam Schwartz Consulting LLC in the amount of $356,670. Moved by Councilmember Griswold, seconded by Councilmember Lum. Discussion. Councilmember Griswold.
Staff recommends that we vote this down, and they have submitted a substitute resolution, DS2.
All in favor? All opposed?
No.
It does not pass. DS2, resolution to approve $21,700 from general fund to fund additional tasks associated with the Comprehensive Transportation Plan Update Project, and to approve an amendment to the professional services agreement with Sam Schwartz Consulting, amount of $373,370. Moved by Councilmember Griswold, seconded by Councilman Lum. Discussion.
And again, it's DS2.
DS2.
Yeah.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilmember Eaton.
So in October, when we passed a resolution asking for this work to be done, it was my hope that we would have that work completed in time to include the recommendations in this budget. And as it stands, it's really quite unlikely that this expenditure will lead to recommendations that can be adequately addressed in this budget. So I'll be voting against this. It's not that I don't want this work done. I just think that it's no longer timely, and so I don't support it, spending the $21,000 on this endeavor at this time.
Councilmember Griswold.
I would support referring this to the Transportation Commission for inclusion in the fiscal year '21 budget.
Further discussion?
Is that a motion or? Yeah. So that's a motion? I just asked.
Motion to refer, seconded by.
I'll second that.
Discussion of the referral. Councilmember Ramlawi.
Thank you. Yeah, I do believe this information that we've requested would be valuable still. I know it wouldn't come back in this budget cycle, but I do support the need for this information and support referring it to the Transportation Commission to bring it back so it could be embedded in a future budget cycle.
Further discussion of the referral? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? It is referred. Do we have communications from our city attorney? We have before us the clerk's report, the altered and amended clerk's report of communications, petitions, and referrals, I believe referencing the origin of F1. We have a motion, please, to approve the clerk's report, moved by Councilmember Hayner, seconded by Councilmember Lum. Discussion?
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to note that item F4 really doesn't satisfy the requirements of the city charter. It purports to be the reasons for the administrative leave that the police chief has been put on, but it doesn't state a reason. It just states the fact that he's being put on administrative leave for personnel reasons, and so I find this deficient. I'm not going to object to accepting it, but I think that fundamentally it doesn't satisfy the requirements of the charter.
Further discussion? Councilmember Hayner.
I just wanted to thank the clerk for updating the notice about the annual report. And basically, the concerns with that is just that the stuff can be found properly by the public. And so we're going to accept this 2019 annual report, and it's going to be amended to show that it came from the Transportation Commission, which is appreciated. So, and I encourage my colleagues to read that. There's a lot of choice stuff in that annual report from the Transportation Commission. It sums up what they did all year. And the footnotes are especially intriguing. And just take the 20 minutes or whatever it's going to take and read that report. And it will inform us as to what are some of the things we have moving forward here. Thank you.
Further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The clerk's report is approved. We now come to public comment general time. Public comment general time is an opportunity for members of the public to speak to council and the community about matters of municipal interest. To speak at public comment general time, one need not have signed up in advance. Speakers have 3 minutes in which to speak, so please pay close attention to the time clock. As a matter of courtesy, we may have only one person speaking at a time. And finally, if you require assistance in speaking before council today, we'd be delighted to provide it to you. Is there anyone who'd like to speak at public comment? Come on up.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In 2017, there were a lot of events concerning parking structures. On May 17, Lindsay Kaneki of the Ann Arbor News published an article in which she said that in the past 14 months, or recent 14 months, there had been 5 people who jumped from parking structures, Ann Arbor parking structures, 3 of whom died. And she published a photo of what Grand Rapids does to protect its parking structures. It's very dramatic. I know we don't take advice from any place as provincial as Grand Rapids, but it is impressive. After that, in June and in September, there were 2 more fatalities, and I know it had personal meaning for several people on the council. And on September 18th, Dr. Graydon and I both spoke in favor of a resolution to have the DDA act quickly to put up some temporary structures that would prevent this, and they did, chain link fencing. In the meantime, unfortunately, there was one more suicide. Someone who had a fight with his wife, I'm told, and got drunk and jumped. People kiss and make up. People sober up. But the target was there. It was a copycat event like shooting up a church or a school. The DDA did resolve, and Mr. Lazarus was there supporting it, the creation of chain link fences for the higher reaches of the room of the structure. It was meant to be fast, but only a stopgap. And in fact, there was a 1-page resolution. 4 times it used the word temporary. That didn't mean we're just going to tear it down in a few years. It meant we're going to replace it, but nothing happened. And yes, again, we had another event at the Liberty Square structure a few weeks ago And this is one thing I found looking at the Liberty Square structure. This is the third floor. And this is a tree, and you can do yourself a hell of a lot of damage and easily kill yourself jumping from the third floor, yet it's completely open. That's what's happening now. Anyway, I urge you to pick up the ball on this thing and see if this kind of structure or something comparable can't be done before we have more of these terrible incidents.
Thank you.
Good evening. Before I begin, I want to thank our city administrator, and he is our city administrator because he belongs to all of us in this community. I want to thank him for his tone that he tried to establish, that he did establish, of civility and respect. My words may diverge a little bit from the tone that you may be wishing me to speak in this evening, Mr. Lazarus, but I assure you they are a much toned-down version from where I began earlier this morning. I am Sally Hart Peterson. I am a new resident of Ward 1 and a former Ward 2 City Council member. I also serve as the Executive Policy Advisor for Economic Development in the Office of the City Administrator. It is in these three capacities that I address you tonight. The decision to terminate our city administrator without cause undermines the long-term integrity and stability of the administrator's role in this city. It undermines morale of our city employees, it is fiscally irresponsible, and it is an insult to all city residents who rely on our administrator's leadership authority and keen decision-making to keep the city running on a day-to-day basis. The decision to terminate our city administrator is short-sighted and is to the long-term detriment of our community. This decision puts ego ahead of the common good. You have made the decision to terminate our administrator without cause because there is no cause other than your choice to not get along with him. Our city administrator, Howard Lazarus, leads with a strong moral compass. He has a clear sense of right and wrong, a respect for authority, and understands the clear line of division between city council and city administration, between policy making and between policy administration. Our city administrator, Howard Lazarus, is a graduate of West Point. As such, he has taken an oath of office to defend the Constitution of the United States in perpetuity. In this role as our city administrator, he continues to honor these ideals of duty, honor, country, and in our case, the city of Ann Arbor. And he exudes the characteristics of selflessness, humility, and dignity. As city council members, you too have taken an oath of office, but your decision tonight stems from long-term ignorance of city council administration rule number 1, and that is the one that says do not interfere with the business of the city administrator, especially a city administrator who otherwise follows the rules of authority and responsibility granted to him according to this city's weak mayor form of government. Now think about it. We all think this is a foregone conclusion. I urge at least one of you to rethink about what you have done tonight, and in the best interest of our community, I urge one of you on the prevailing side to reconsider your vote at the next city council meeting.
Thank you.
My name is Julie Roth. This is my first time attending a city council meeting, and it is because of the vote that you made to terminate Mr. Lazarus. The notion that this is some straightforward personnel matter that you simply can't speak about reeks of falsehood. This was a completely political move. If there was some thing you couldn't talk about that was reason for termination, the termination would have been unanimous, or at least not along this factionized city council. I have avoided aligning myself with factions on city council, mostly because I don't believe in them. I think it's wrong and destructive and not useful. I've always imagined a city council with a diversity of voices being stronger, more robust, more able to come to compromise that benefits everybody, more so than groupthink, where everyone already agrees with each other. But you have just proven me wrong, and you have just aligned me with a faction, and I'm angry about that. But that's where I stand, and every one of you that voted to fire Mr. Lazarus tonight, who is up for re-election, my pledge to you is I will do everything in my power in November to support your opponent. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Ed Vilmetti. I'd like to call to your attention, because you might not have had time to read it, because everything happened really quickly with this employment agreement, but there are two aspects of it that are distinctive, and having held a bunch of jobs and having lost a bunch of jobs, I recognize the bits of them right away. Sections 9 and 10, I don't remember which is which, but one of them is a mutual non-disparagement agreement. I've had these before from employers who I refuse to mention by name. This is, you're not going to say anything, but if you can't say anything nice, don't say anything at all. I would recommend to anyone who might be subject to such a thing that the next time you negotiate an employment contract, that you replace any idea of this with a mutual admiration agreement in which both sides are required to say something nice. It may be too late for that, but check with your attorney and see if that can be done. The other piece, which I thought was more in keeping with the sort of things that I look at and think about with city government, was an unusual a non-disclosure agreement that required the outgoing employee to relinquish essentially all materials related to the city. Badges, pins, who knows what all. There was a litany of them. And not to disclose anything confidential. Well, so that on the confidential front, I'm sure that the job includes a bunch of things that would be confidential information that I, as a citizen looking for public records, would be turned down on a FOIA request because the records were confidential. But the notion that an outgoing employee should have no records of the place that they had left, I think is unreasonable. I think that given that this is a public body and that any citizen has the right to request from a public body any number of records that would help them understand how the city worked and how things happened. I wouldn't have, as a city, I would not have pressed for that language. I think it's overly over the top. It's overly harsh. I don't have replacement language. Sorry. In any case, I wish you the best of luck and some time with your family.
Thank you.
Although you may not have freedom of speech to say what you want to say, I get offended when you tell me that I can't say something. I have my freedom of speech, and I will say it. A city administrator works with elected officials regardless of party. So even if the politicians change, that level of government stays constant to keep a city functioning in a stable manner. Elected people may come and go, but those who work as staff should have stable jobs and should not be fired due to politics. Who would want to work for a city government or as staff if they were told that they could be fired in the next election cycle? As this firing is without cause, then to me this is a firing for political reasons. And that is not how staff should be treated in our local government. You wait for the end of the 4 years or whatever the thing is, and you judge is a thing then, you don't do it mid-sentence. You don't do it in the middle like this. It's one thing to complain about staff and ask them to do stuff. It's another thing to fire them because of politics. And as I watched the vote today, it is very obvious it is because of politics. And keep in mind, I have fought for you, Councilmember Lum, so much. I have a lot. I want a 7-4 council, and that 4 council, I've always wanted you to be in that council because I still respect you a lot. But politically, I disagree very strongly with you. To me, this was like a red line. and I cannot support you in the next election whatsoever. It's one of those things that pains me to see. To me, when I look at national politics, I see too much where people are fired in staff kind of jobs because of politics. We see the Trumpian kind of politics going on, and I'm seeing it here today, and it bothers me a lot. It's hard to talk. I can't say, I admire a lot what just former Councilmember Peterson just said. I can't say it better than what she just said. That's leadership right there. On one other topic, Councilmember Eaton, it is not right to politicize a suicide, a recent suicide, into political stuff. It's fine to talk about issues and how we can improve the city and things like that, but do not go after a recent suicide like that. This was a student, and unless you got permission from that family to say something and they wanted you to say something, don't do it. Pay attention to those, be nice to those who have suffered loss. But what we saw tonight was incredibly political. Lazarus, one thing I really have always admired about you is that you have always stood up for your staff, and I'd always want a boss like that. That is an incredible quality to have, even when you're criticized. I will absolutely miss you. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Frances Tedora, the Vice Chair of the ICPOC Group, and we had a meeting earlier tonight. We've been asked to share some statements that were read at the beginning of that meeting. So I'm sharing one on behalf of a commissioner that wasn't able to attend. Dear Chairwoman Jackson and fellow commissioners, I've been in Spain for the past month. However, despite the distance, I have heard that Police Chief Cox has been placed on administrative leave, and that no public explanation has been given about the city's drastic action, not even to City Council or ICPOC commissioners. This action, and especially the secrecy surrounding it, reflects badly on the city of Ann Arbor. It will have a serious negative effect on the morale of the police department and, of course, the newly founded ICPOC. Additionally, the secretive action actually interferes with ICPOC's work of furthering trust and good relationship between the city of Ann Arbor, its police department, and the city's minorities and communities of color. Chief Cox has not been in his position but for a short period, and one cannot begin to imagine what could he have done to deserve such drastic action. No matter what the ultimate outcome, this action will make it extremely difficult to Chief Cox or any successor to feel secure in executing their duties and implementing changes that would assist in the goal of the Independent Community Police Oversight Commission. The silence of our mayor and the city administrator leaves too much room for idle speculations. The longer the silence, the more speculation and rumors will be generated. I would like to voice my opinion, and I do hope that all the members of the commission are united in their demand for a speedy, open explanation and resolution of this matter. Respectfully, Commissioner Anand Amiri.
Hi, I'm Lisa Jackson. I'm the chair of the Independent Police Oversight Commission, and we were asked to read a statement that was read tonight at our meeting where we had an overflow crowd. We had to bring chairs in from other rooms and make lots of space for many concerned citizens who were attending primarily because Chief Michael Cox was unexpectedly placed on administrative leave. We started off by saying that all of the commissioners in the room are invested in this community. Each of us has a demonstrated commitment to enhance accountability and transparency in policing and to build community trust through civilian oversight. We were appointed to be responsible to the community. We were primarily formed because of the officer-involved shooting of Aura Rosser in 2015 and the subsequent work of activists in the task force who were convened from the Human Rights Commission. One of the principal reasons we were appointed is because of the city's stated desire to enhance transparency and to have us facilitate a mutually beneficial relationship between the police and those who live and work in the city. And it is transparency that is the focus of all of our work. Chief Cox went through a rigorous interview process that included community members, members of this commission, and city council members. He was by far the most experienced candidate, having led a force several times that of Ann Arbor. His prior experience included internal affairs, operations, and professional development, of police officers. We have been informed that he has not had a complaint filed against him during his 30 years in Boston. Although it is clear that the city lacks a professional human resources administrator at this time, we want to be clear that we know it is not our job to evaluate HR issues. However, we were convened to provide oversight of police policy and procedure, and it's challenging to do so in an environment that is this secretive. We understand the need for a confidential evaluation. We do. But we are very concerned about the way the process itself has been handled. For example, due to the lack of clarification, the public has been left to speculate about what has happened. We have received calls from all over the country. Newspaper headlines have been written such as, quote, "After only 7 months on the job, the chief has done something so serious that he's been placed on administrative leave for at least 2 weeks." Although the city had the opportunity to decrease some of the speculation, they have not chosen to do so, and thus we are having to field these calls. We want to make abundantly clear that this administrative action was not a result of any issue with the Independent Community Police Oversight Commission. We did not lodge a complaint. We have struggled on occasion to get information on cases, but that backlog was not directly due to the chief, and we have been recently able to make good progress working with Lieutenant Bonnie Tile in professional standards. Our last point is that when the Miller Canfield investigation is complete, we hope that we will be privy to the report, and most importantly, that it will be made public. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else who'd like to speak at public comment?
Hello, I'm Zachary Story. Once again, I'm asking for affordable housing. But really more importantly, shame on a lot of you up here. Councilmember Lum, Councilmember Bannister, Councilmember Eaton, don't get too comfortable up there. Your days are numbered behind this, at this desk. You know, this is outrageous. And thank you to Mr. Lazarus. I've been coming here for about 6 months now. I've been observing all of you, and this is outrageous. And like a previous speaker said, well, first of all, let's have a little activity here. Raise your hand if you voted for Trump up there. Anyone? Really? Okay, sure. Then why do some on this council attack the press just like Trump does? Fire people repeatedly, over and over again, attack the press because they don't like the quote, word for word. I'm looking at you, Councilmember Hayner. Yeah, I'll call you out. I'm just livid now at the behavior of this particular council, and so many in the community are, and we're organizing, and we're fed up with it. To fire somebody because they want to build, because they're doing their job and engaging with science and data that you don't like. You know, this is shady as fuck. And shame on you, 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 and shame on you. You know, I read an article that there are about a dozen cities in Michigan that can't find qualified city administrators. And you're putting our city, our community in turmoil by doing what you're doing. Like, what the fuck? What in the actual fuck? Pardon my language, but I just speak my mind. I speak with my passion, and previously I've just tried to play the nice game and engage in civil discourse, but I got to start calling some of y'all out, and that's what I'm doing tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who'd like to speak at public comment?
Yeah, Tim Peterson, Ward 1. Howard,
Unfortunately, and not enough sort of normal, reasonable people in Ann Arbor pay attention to this process, and at times I include myself in the process. I have access through my wife to more information than probably a lot of people do, so that's why I'm here tonight. Otherwise, I might not be here tonight. So on behalf of the people that are reasonable in this community, really all I want to say is I'm sorry. It is extremely unfortunate for you to be treated this way. The process is just ridiculous. Many of us have been through personnel matters in our careers that can be handled in a way that is professional and completely different than this, even if there's extreme disagreements. There is just no question that that is the case. So maybe a silver lining in this whole process for you is that folks like myself will get even more active with our time and our money to make sure that this body changes going forward. I'm sorry.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who'd like to speak at public comment?
Well, it's working. Well, I'm kind of startled. I came here because Jeff Henney was talking about a wider view of the commons and community cooperation. And I hope you will keep that in mind as the recommendations come to you from the task force, which has been working for months, and in very positive cooperation with Mr. Lazarus, a relationship I've appreciated. And this is just this, all these behind-the-scenes moves of suspension and termination, I just don't get it. It seems to me that, I don't even know what it seems to me, that the relationship of the principal staff and the public and the commons and the council to whom the staff is accountable should be much more public and visible. And mystery and behind the scenes does not contribute to democratic politics in any way. So I'm surprised at whatever has gone on. It is not clear to me. I don't think it serves Ann Arbor, democracy, Howard, or whatever is coming next. I hope whoever is coming next will be supportive of the creation of the community commons as Jeff Henney said, as a way between the private sector and the government sector of actually getting cooperation among people to do things that is in everyone's best welfare. And I'm sorry that the council meeting that I came to has this as its character rather than a more affirmative sense of both the commons and pesticides and affordable housing and taking care of the business of the town. So I'm sorry this is what I experienced, and I hope you can figure it out in some way in the public to have some community appreciation of what is going on and some solidarity. But I'm sorry this is the way it's come down, and I hope whoever is next as city administrator will be helpful with the commons, and that the council will see Earth Day and Bloom's Day and the times coming up as a time to gather and make vibrant the center of our city.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who'd like to speak at public comment? Seeing no one, public comment is closed. Are there communications today from council? Do we have a closed session today?
No, Mayor.
May I have a motion, please, to adjourn? Moved by Councilmember Griswold, seconded by Councilmember Grand. Discussion. All in favor? Opposed? We're adjourned.